All right, welcome everyone to the facilitator training for the new problem gambling prevention graphic novel Against the Odds. I am Sara Harlow. I'm the co-director for the New England PTTC, and facilitating with me today is Kaitlin Brown. Kaitlin, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Kaitlin Brown. I am the Senior Director of Programs and Services with the Connecticut Council on Problem Gambling. And I had the privilege and honor of working on this project with Sarah and the rest of the team as the content expert. So when we get to the part about the facilitator guide and some of the gambling specific information, I'll be walking you through all of that. So please feel free to put any questions in the chat.
Awesome. Thanks, Kaitlin. So a couple of quick things before we get started. The event that you're about to participate in is provided through the New England Prevention Technology Transfer Center, which is funded through SAMHSA. You can see our cooperative agreement number there. We like to let folks know that we believe that language matters and the use of affirming language inspires hope. The whole PTTC network tries to use person-first language as often as we can, and we ask that you try to do the same while you're participating in conversations today. So we're going to dive right in. If anyone has any technical issues or concerns, you can reach out to me and I have a few colleagues on the call today. Susan and Zam are here too. So if you can't get to me because I'm talking, please feel free to also reach out to Susan or Zam. So we're going to be talking about this new product, and we will get you the link to this product. If you don't have it yet, don't worry, that is going to be a part of our conversation today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the product is, how it came to be, how you can use it, and then we're going to walk through all of the resources available to you in the facilitator guide. We're going to talk about tips for facilitation, and you'll get a chance to practice facilitation a little bit today as well. So this product is available in Spanish, English, and Portuguese. If anybody is joining us from outside of the 6 New England states, you have access to this as well through PDF. And if you're in the 6 New England states listed here, you also have access to this as a paperback product. The Spanish and Portuguese paperback copies are still in the printing process. So for those who maybe have already requested those or intend to request those, just know that they're still being printed and we don't have those available yet. But the English copies are available and in the process of being sent in the mail. So if you requested a paperback version of this in any of the 3 languages and you haven't received it yet, just know we are either in the process of printing or shipping. So this product is designed as a platform for people with problem gambling prevention knowledge to share that knowledge with young people through this tool. So it's designed by students. It was really student-led in the story. So it's designed to be an interesting tool, a fun tool to communicate this information, but definitely as a tool in your prevention work. It does contain information about gambling, but we tried to write it in a way that the information wouldn't be outdated really quickly. So I'm sure many of you know there's a lot of changes happening with laws and rules and regulations around problem gambling right now, and Kaitlin can speak more to that. But specifically with things like online gambling and sports betting, things are changing fairly rapidly. So we really wanted to make sure that we weren't writing something into this book that would be outdated quickly, and therefore you wouldn't be able to use this product in a year or so. So we wanted to talk a little bit in this product about a lot of things. We tried to cover many items, and I see I have an old image in here. This image is from our previous graphic medicine in the air. So that's a pretend image. Ignore that. But these topics are the topics that we covered in this product. So we wanted to talk about risk and protective factors. We wanted to talk about signs of problem gambling, so what that might look like if someone was struggling with harms of gambling. We wanted to talk about some of the logical fallacies of gambling. So what are some ways you might be thinking about gambling that aren't necessarily true? And we also wanted to write in some socioeconomic and environmental factors that might affect somebody and gambling. So we wanted to center youth voices in this product. So we worked with South Portland United. We're our focus group for this product. They are out of South Portland, Maine, and they are a group that does a lot of substance use prevention work. And so in order to have this conversation with them, we went in and talked to them about what problem gambling looks like. There are some shared risk and protective factors. And so we wanted to make sure that young people were driving the story that we wanted to share here. So some things that the students wanted to see in a story that would make it more engaging for them were things like relatable characters, stereotypes not really being the lead for those characters, but what are some ways that we can break some stereotypes in the story? The students didn't want to see addiction being the bad guy of a story. People can have addiction, but that's not necessarily the thing that's driving the story. They wanted to see character development, and they didn't want to see rainbows and sunshine ending. That was the words they used, in that it's realistic. It's not like you have an addiction and then you walk away from it and it doesn't impact you anymore, but that you learn to cope. They wanted to see clear messages, but they didn't want to have that in your face. They also wanted to see how the problems we face don't really just resolve, but we continue going through life. Connections were really important to the young people, and also the use of color to show changing moods and themes. That was really important to them visually. So we did include a content warning in this product. We just wanted to let folks know because they were going to be visually seeing young people who were gambling or who had behaviors that are near gambling. We wanted to offer a content warning so that other young people who may be struggling with that can see that before they begin reading. So this content warning is in the book. For anyone who were to pick it up, they would see that content warning from the beginning. So students are shown gambling, and that could be difficult for some folks. So just know that if you're going to be facilitating with this product, that it could be something that young folks struggle with. And Kaitlin has some great ideas about how to handle that if you do have somebody who's struggling. I don't know, Kaitlin, do you want to mention how you might handle that in a facilitating setting?
Sure. So I think the main point of this is that we want students to be able to get the information, but the facilitators do not necessarily need to be the experts in problem gambling, gambling related harm, and they also may not be counselors or social workers. So you might not have the background of mental health, but we're thinking of teachers. So making sure that you have a connection with a social worker or a counselor that is on staff if you are implementing this in the school. We do have a whole section about resources. So we did include the helpline number. So if anybody had a problem with gambling or was worried about someone else's gambling, they could always call the 24/7 problem gambling helplines, and those numbers differ depending on where you are. So we included the information about the New England states. However, if you are joining us from outside of New England, there is a national problem gambling helpline number run through the National Council on Problem Gambling, which is pretty easy to remember. It's 1-800-GAMBLER. And so they're able to do referrals to treatment. They're able to give resources. So if you can connect with someone who is at the location, specifically if it's in a school or with a youth group that has a clinical background. That would be my #1 recommendation. And then we'll talk a lot about other resources that are available if someone did need additional support after going through this product.
Thanks, Kaitlin. So a little more about how to use this problem gambling product. So the first way is as a curriculum. So if you were using this as a curriculum, what you would do is read the book and have the students read the book. Then you would talk about it. So the conversation really is the most important piece with this, is having conversations with young folks. And making those connections so that they know you are someone they can come to and talk to about problem gambling in the future. So giving them the information, but also being that trusted adult who they can come to with questions. Next, if you were using this as a curriculum, you would have young people complete the worksheets that are available in the facilitator guide, which we will share with you. You would check in about the materials and the resources. So having it be a conversation that's a little bit longer over the course of time, and we'll share with you what that timeline can look like. And you would also have the students as well as yourself complete brief surveys. So there are 2 student surveys, a pre and a post survey. And the facilitator, there is just 1 survey for folks who are leading the conversations. Another way you can use this product is just reading the book and talking about it. So if you didn't want to go through the curriculum to fidelity, you also can just have a young person read this and then have a conversation. The facilitator guide is there to help you have a more informed conversation. So if you're the kind of person who really wants to have this conversation, but you're not really sure where to start or what resources are available to you, you could use the facilitator guide still to have more background information, but you don't necessarily need to use it as a curriculum. The most important piece of this is talking about the content with students and using the graphic medicine as a tool. It doesn't necessarily work on its own, just handing them the book and having them read it, because there's a really necessary component of the conversation with an adult. So one example that Kaitlin and I were talking about just before this meeting is handing them out like as a tool or resource at like a health fair, and then the students walk away with the book. If there's no follow-up connection with the students about the book and what they read, it's really missing a critical piece for them to learn and get the resources they need. So we're going to talk a little bit about the facilitator guide, and I'm going to turn it to Kaitlin to share some of these pieces. And I also am starting to question if I have the wrong slides up. So I'm going to turn it to Kaitlin to share the facilitator guide on the website, and I will get the link to that facilitator guide in the chat too, so folks can have access to the guide as Kaitlin is sharing. And I will stop sharing my screen so Kaitlin can take over.
Perfect. Thank you, Sarah. I'll also just take this moment before I share my screen just to check in if anybody had any questions so far, or any comments about any of the information that Sarah has shared. And feel free to also use the chat so you don't have to come off mute, but we'll continue to check in. I'm going to make sure I am sharing my correct screen. So if you can let me know, Sarah, are you seeing the facilitator's guide?
Yes, we are seeing it.
Okay, perfect. So you're going to get a whole copy of the facilitator's guide. Like Sarah said, she's going to put it in the chat. So I just wanted to go through a couple components here about some of the material, because I do see some friendly faces on here that are well versed in problem gambling prevention and information, but some of this information might be new to some of you. So some of the topics that are covered in the facilitator guide are what is gambling, so talking about the definitions and types of gambling, which you can see here on the screen. So when we're talking about gambling, we're talking about risking something of value on something that has an uncertain outcome. So a lot of times people are associating that with money, but when we're talking about young people and youth, it doesn't necessarily always have to be money. They could be betting chores, they could be betting material items. So anything that is of value of that person. And then there's a lot of different types of gambling. So like Sarah said, we didn't want to put too many examples in here because the landscape of gambling is really changing very quickly. And depending on where you are, there's different opportunities for legalized gambling. But we did include the most popular types, or what you might see, or if you start talking about gambling with young people, what they might have questions about, or maybe what they have already experienced. So we included information about the lottery, which includes Keno, Powerball, daily numbers, scratch tickets, the casinos. Most states do have casinos, but not all. We have off-track betting, which is the opportunity to bet on horses or dog racing, depending on what's legal in your state. Online casino and sports betting is something that's relatively new still to us here in Connecticut. I know other states have had it longer and some have none, but the legislation is there. So online gambling is any type of gambling that people can do at a casino. So cards, roulette, craps, slot machines can all be done online. And then also sports betting. So before that, sports betting was illegal in the majority of states, and now we see a lot of states legalizing sports betting. We also included information about charitable games, raffles, bingos. When you do start to read some of this material, you'll see carnivals. So that is a topic too, because not many people think about carnivals and those types of games as gambling, but we tried to make those connections for young people. Stock market, cryptocurrency, and then there is a piece in the facilitator's guide about video games, because we are seeing blurred lines there, especially for young people being exposed earlier to gambling within video games. So we did include a piece in the facilitator's guide about the convergence, as well as what are loot boxes, what are skins, because chances are when you're talking to young people, they either are participating in this themselves or know someone who is. I'm going to scroll through to some of the other information here. We did include warning signs. So we wanted to make sure that as we're going through this, it might not be the person who's reading the book or participating in this group that has experienced harms related to their gambling, but maybe they can identify some warning signs in their friends, their family members, community members, and might start asking questions. So we wanted to make sure that we included the warning signs, which are spending more time and money gambling, creating special occasions to gamble, increasing intensity of interest. You might see people being more withdrawn, especially with young people. It might be absences from school, or their grades are impacted, chasing losses with more gambling. So maybe they gambled, they lost a significant amount of money, and the only way that they feel that they can get that money back is by continuing to gamble. Lack of interest in other activities. So maybe you had someone who was in a lot of clubs or extracurriculars or sports, and now they're losing interest in that because they're more focused on gambling. Using money for other purposes on gambling, exaggerated display of money and possessions. And then one of the biggest warning signs or red flags would be using gambling as a way to escape or cope with negative things that are going on in their life. So we did include information about that. We also have a whole section in the facilitator guide about risk factors and protective factors. So I'm not going to go through all of these because you are going to get the facilitator guide and have time to explore that on your own. But we did want to make sure that we highlighted that there are specific risk factors that increase the likelihood that someone of any age could develop a gambling problem at some point in their life. And so one that is really important is experiencing an early big win. What we find about gambling is that usually people are exposed to substances later on in their adolescence or in their life. But with gambling, if you ask young people, or if you ask anyone that you work with, what was the earliest age you remember gambling, or you remember gambling being around you, the majority of people say around 5 or 6. So we talk about the exposure, knowing that the earlier you're exposed to something or the earlier you start a behavior, That also increases the likelihood of you developing a problem. And then even more importantly, experiencing an early big win. People really do remember that, and then they tend to chase the high that can be associated with those wins, which also goes along with early access to gambling. We also put information in here about not understanding the odds. So there's a section that I'll cover in a minute about the gambling fallacies. But we do want to make sure that we know that if someone had a parent who had a gambling problem, that increases their likelihood. So maybe that could be something that comes out of this conversation too. Maybe it's not the young person or their friends, but maybe they start to read this book and they're identifying certain pieces and elements that relate to maybe one of their parents or a family member. We also have all information about here about how risk factors are highlighted in the characters. So I really like this piece because in the facilitator guide, the students or the young people are going to be reading the book. So you'll know in your head what all the risk factors are, but it gives very specific examples of what the characters are going through for their risk factors. So it really helps to put those connections together. So we have all of the examples included there. We have information here all about protective factors. Let's skip this part here. There's more information about teens who gamble and how that increases the likelihood of other risky behaviors. So again, a lot of times students or young people are being educated about suicide prevention and mental health promotion and substance misuse. But very rarely are we finding that young people are being educated about the risks that are involved with gambling. So one, this is a really nice activity to help them to understand that there are risks with gambling, but also the connections to other high-risk behaviors that they might be more aware of. There's warning signs specifically to teens. There's a whole toolkit here with resources and how to talk to youth about gambling. And then this is the part that I had mentioned before about specific discussion points. And I think when we go back to the slides, we'll talk a little bit more about the discussion points and how they go along with the worksheets. But here's what I was talking about before with the blurred lines between gaming and gambling. So this could be through social casino games. It could be through skins. It can be through loot boxes. And obviously some people are going to be more familiar with this material than others. But very simply for today's overview training, skins are anything that can be obtained in a video game through progression, or they can also be purchased for physical world or real world money. They don't make you a better player, but they could look like a costume for your avatar or change what your weapon looks like. And there is a whole world of skins betting happening within video games too, so that people are betting their skins in hopes of getting something better or also hoping to get some money. And then loot boxes are like mystery crates and boxes that happen to be in video games. So again, you can earn them or you can buy them, and they work on the same mechanics as a slot machine. So it's completely random and independent of what happened before. It has all the bells and whistles like a slot machine if anyone has ever been to a casino. So it makes it very exciting. And so if you're using your real world money to purchase a loot box, your hope is that you're going to get an item that is worth a lot of money or makes your character look cooler. But in reality, the majority of the time, you're getting something that you already have many of, or that is not rare, is not special. And that just increases the likelihood of people continuing to buy loot boxes. And then here, there's a lot more discussion points. Here we highlight more connections, like Sarah said, kind of the theme throughout the graphic medicine novel is the connection piece. And you'll see that as you start to read that too. And then we also wanted to make sure that we included gambling fallacies. And so we included, I think there's like 10 different fallacies that we have included here. It gives the definition of the fallacy with specific examples from the story. So for example, looking at superstitions, that's a really big one when we're talking about gambling. Many times people think that if they park in the same parking spot at the casino, that makes them lucky, or maybe they have a lucky machine. Or I always use the example of going to play bingo at the casino with my grandmother, and everyone has their trolls and dolls and trinkets that are supposed to bring them good luck. So that all goes into superstitions. We have a piece here about ignoring the odds, forgetting the law of averages. So if I think traditionally we kind of think of using this in a health class or a wellness class. but it can also be used in a math class to talk about the law of averages and the odds. So there's information there. Random events are not influenced by history. Early wins and occasional rewards can encourage false hope. And again, how the gambling industry can sometimes entice people to continue to participate in the behavior. Attributing success to skill and failure to bad luck. So this is a big one that happens in the book. So a lot of times if they're winning, they think, oh, I'm so great at whatever it is that I'm doing. And if they're losing, it must be something else, bad luck. And I think a lot of young people do fall into that one. And then money does not solve all problems. So they talk about the misconception that winning a large amount of money through gambling can magically fix all of life's problems. And when the young people that I've worked with, they always talk about if they did win a big jackpot, all of the wonderful, amazing things that they have ideas to do with. Normalizing behavior. So a lot of times people think that their behavior is normal, or they compare it to other people, or they'll say, oh, well, so-and-so does this, so my behavior can't be that bad. I'm not spending that much money, or I'm not risking as much as someone else. Confusing, often, and memorable. And then those are all the gambling fallacies. So I think those are all the conversation topics, Sarah, that we wanted to cover in the fallacies part and in the implementation guide. So we can go back to the slides, and then we can kind of talk about the fidelity and the rest of the stuff that's in the facilitation guide.
Okay.
All right, perfect. So that was just a glimpse at what the facilitation guide looks like. Sarah is going to, I think she already put it in the chat, so everyone will have access to that. We're also going to do breakout rooms so we can practice and start looking at some of this information. I can make myself available. I know Sarah is available as people start to get copies of the book and look at the implementation guide. And have questions. We're here to support you in trying to implement this wherever the locations are. Sarah talked a little bit about the pre, post, and facilitator surveys. So I think that's a really important piece when you're talking about fidelity. So it's not technically evidence-based, but it's evidence-informed, and we really are moving towards trying to collect that evidence to show that this is something that is a great resource for prevention and hopefully make some positive changes, whether it be increasing knowledge about gambling, decreasing behaviors, or just having those conversations and increasing awareness, letting people know that gambling is not a risk-free activity. And so the pre and post surveys really help us do that, to acknowledge what do people know before they read the book, and has their attitudes or behaviors and knowledge changed after going through reading the book and doing some of the worksheets. We talked about the conversation topics. There are the full and abbreviated length timeline. Sarah, I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, of how long.
Yeah, I just would say that there we'll show what the two timelines are, and you can see those in the facilitator guide. But as folks know who offer prevention programs to young people, the more time that you can do a program tends to be more effective. But we also know the reality of the situation is that sometimes you're working with a class and you have like one or two chances to make connections. And so no connection, obviously, or a connection is better than no connection. But the longer a conversation goes on, the more it's impactful for the student, the more they can absorb and think about and process. So we have the timeline that is the gold star timeline, but we included an abbreviated timeline too, so folks could kind of see how it would be possible to do this if you only have a couple connection points with students, because that's just a reality a lot of the time.
Perfect. And then there's also worksheets, which we mentioned, I think a couple of the slides after this show some examples of the worksheets, and you're also going to get to see that. There's example pages, and then lots of resources that are including in the book that we can also go over towards the end. So if you want to go to the next slide, Sarah. So here's more information about Fidelity, how to use this tool as a complete program. So this is a sample directly from that facilitator's guide that I had showed you. So it talks about how to discuss the fallacies, the warning signs, the risk and protective factors with students. Like Sarah said, the worksheets are optional, but I think they are helpful, especially because a lot of people process information very differently. So some people can just read the novel itself and process it as information. Some people need to write it down. Some people need more time to process the information, to really think about it and how this might be applied to their everyday life. So I think the worksheets are really helpful to go back to continue to have those conversations. This is really meant for young people in grades 6 through 12. Was what it was created for. Not to say that if you had a group outside of that, that you couldn't use it with. I actually teach part-time at Fairfield University here in Connecticut, and I brought a copy of this to my students that I was teaching last semester of a behavioral addictions class. And so they're grad students, and they're like, this is amazing. We would love to use this. And one works in a middle school. They're like, can we use this? And I'm like, yes, of course. So I think the more information and the more locations that we can get the information out, the better. But it really was intended for grades 6 through 12. We talked about the importance of the pre and post survey, and then the options to follow those two timelines.
I will add to Kaitlin, I'm not sure I said it explicitly at the beginning, but you can definitely see it in some of the images. The students from South Portland United said that they are really interested in the horror genre, and that horror is really engaging for them and fun to read. So we did write this in the horror genre, which was interesting to figure out how to put the health information into that genre. But you can see in some of these images that as we go through, where that kind of shines through. And because we did write this for as low as 6th grade, there's nothing too scary, horrific, but it just was a more engaging story for the youth if it did have that horror element. So you'll see that as we go throughout too.
Yeah, Sarah, thank you for adding that. I don't think you mentioned it in the beginning. And I remember when I first was approached to be part of this project, and Sarah was like, well, what do you think about the horror genre? And I was like, I am a horror fan, so it worked for me. And it was really interesting to see how the young people's ideas, and then with Sarah writing it, how it all came together. So it's horror, but it's also sci-fi. So if anyone's ever seen the show Stranger Things, that's the kind of the vibe that it reminds me of, with all of this information about gambling and just everyday problems and issues that young people go through. So I think that helps to draw in the attention instead of just coming into a class and saying, today I'm going to talk about the risks with problem gambling, right? We want them to get the information, but in an engaging way that they're going to remember the material. Here's more information about the pre and post survey for the students, as well as the one for the facilitator. So all of those links live within the facilitator's guide. I don't know, Sarah, if you want to include any of that in the chat, or it'll just be in the guide. I did see someone put a question in the chat just saying that they didn't know if they signed up for the guide, but can they make sure that you're on the list? And we'll make sure that everybody gets a copy.
Yeah, and I'll put the link in the chat. If you follow the link, you'll see about halfway down the page, there is a piece where it says to download the facilitator guide in full color. Click here. If you go there, you should be able to find that and have access to it today. And
then someone else. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just saying, Wendy says, do we complete the facilitator guide after each time? You don't have to. The facilitator guide basically, the facilitator survey lets us know that you, how close to fidelity are you implementing the program? And also there's a place there for feedback from you. So if there's more that you need, or there's something missing you could use, that allows us to be able to provide that to you also. So you would complete the facilitator survey one time, but then as you are using this and implementing it with different students, You are free to go back to that survey if there's more information that you want to give us that you find along the way. You could use more support or another resource, or there's something else that you need.
Thank you, Sarah. You can go to the next slide. This is the part that I just showed you all in the facilitator guide. So we have key discussion points talking about the blurred lines of gaming and gambling, with specific components about the skins and loot boxes, and then conversation starting questions. So you can see in here too. So we went through the risk factors, and there's also information about protective factors, the fallacies, the warning signs, what is gambling, types of gambling, and then there's specific questions listed out in that guide to just further conversation. So instead of just saying, what is a warning sign, right? And having them just listed out, you can say, what is an example, or what character and that you read, what warning sign were they experiencing, and how did you know that that was a warning sign? Or have you ever seen any of these warning signs with people that you know? So there's a lot of different questions so that you can continue to have that conversation instead of just saying, here are the warning signs, just deepening that connection and that conversation.
I would add to that piece too, Kaitlin, that I would encourage, if the students are asking questions or leading the conversation in some direction, to follow that direction. So the conversation questions and the discussion points are certainly places where we think you could have some in-depth conversation. And if a student is leading the conversation in another direction, it might be because they've had experiences or their friends have had experiences and they have questions that are kind of specific about that, or they want to talk through something specific to their own life experiences. So I would always encourage that the conversation questions are there and the discussion points are there. But if the students you're working with are taking the conversation in another direction, that you go in that direction with them.
Thanks, Sarah. Here's more information about the timeline. So we talked about this as well, that there's a full length and an abbreviated length. So with the full length, you're going to make sure that you're administering that pre-survey, discussing all the fallacies. You're going to have them read chapters in different sections, and so that you have time to process and talk about it. This also includes the part about where they can talk about their first impressions, choose a few conversation questions from the worksheet section to discuss. And then week 2, you would go into having the students be able to reflect back on what they absorbed from chapters 1 and 2, as well as some of the assignments, going over some of the fallacies, giving a lot of time for questions. So just like Sarah said, if there's a question that's not in the facilitator's guide, I'm sure that they have a lot more questions that we haven't thought of in the first go around here, that also would be helpful information for you as a facilitator to put into that survey. Just because it would be helpful information for us to know if we ever did this again, or if we did a part 2, or just implementing it for other facilitators, what came up for conversation. You would have them read the next couple of chapters, give them the opportunity again to discuss their first impressions, choose conversation questions, do the worksheets if you have time, and if you find that they are useful, depending on the group that you're doing it with, and then have them read the following chapters. And so the full length really takes 3 to 4 weeks. So again, depending on if you have access, if you're a teacher and you have access to students every single week to be able to do this, great. If you're working with youth groups and you could do this after school and you have the time, great. But we do know that sometimes it is hard and you can only get into a class 1 or 2 times. I know some of my colleagues have recently started going into middle schools and high schools, and they're like, you have 40 minutes. And so if you only have 40 minutes, like Sarah said, some information and some connection is better than nothing at all. So then, and at that point, you would move towards using the abbreviated length, which could be done in 1 week with some kind of follow-up. So again, important to administer the pre-survey, discussing the fallacies, have them read the chapters, have them talk about it. If there is time for the worksheets, great. If not, you can assign them as homework, and then hopefully you are able to have that second meeting or second class with them so that they could go back, look at the assignments, ask their questions, and then administer the post-survey. So ideally, if you can do it with the full length, which each session would be about an hour or whatever time you have, that is what we would like to see. But again, if you only can do the abbreviated length, we're okay with that too. And those seem to be a little bit longer. We recommend about an hour and a half for those sessions. And then here are the worksheet examples. So consider letting the students choose whether or not to share their worksheets. So I know that's been helpful. Again, you're going to know the people that you're working with better than we do. So some students are very happy to share their information. Some might be writing about some really personal things that maybe they're willing to share with you as the facilitator if they're handing it in or having a conversation afterwards. But I think most importantly, it's just a time for them to reflect on the material that they're reading so that they can see how this might start to apply to their own lives and what they're able to obtain. So this is just an example of one of the worksheets that talks about risk and protective factors. And then we give specific examples and then they're able to write their own examples as well. Sarah, can this be done virtually? We have a question in the chat.
I think it's feasible. It's designed to do it in person, but you do have the story available through PDF. And then, of course, the facilitator guide is available in print or through PDF. So we haven't done it that way, and it wasn't designed to be done that way, but I think it could be done that way. And I would just encourage, if you are going to do it virtually, let us know how it goes. But also, if you do complete that facilitator survey, that will help us to know that folks are doing it that way. So when we are going through that evidence-based process, we know what the actual implementation looked like. So yeah, I think it's possible. And I also want to add, while I'm unmuted, that on the worksheets where right underneath the risk and protective, there are these questions. These are the questions, or at least some of the questions that we had, that we showed a few slides back under discussion points. So we put them in here so that if you are using those questions as part of your conversations with young people, that when they're doing these worksheets on their own, they can think back to some of what the conversation may have been. So I'm going to scroll quickly. So if that bothers your eyes, look away for a minute. But back here under conversations. So if you were talking about or using these to guide your conversations, having them here would then help that person reflect on the conversation you already had when they're doing their independent work with the worksheets. So I just want to add that note too.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, and so every worksheet has those guiding questions and the connection piece. So for those who might not be able to see it because it is very small, I'll just read a couple of those bullet points from this worksheet. So talking about risk and protective factors. So what risk factors does Luke, one of the characters, experience in his life? Connection to others can be a risk factor or a protective factor. What do you think about the characters deciding to have a connections group to deal with some of their struggles? What supports did the student have in their lives and place? And what roles does community organizing and self-advocacy play in the lives of the characters? So you can see they go from basic questions to more community organizing and bringing groups of people together types of questions and brainstorming. We also included, like I said, a lot of resources. So the bottom image here, you can see, because this was really developed within New England, doesn't mean that you can't use it outside of New England, but we did highlight this. So you're able to see the New England states. You can click on the state and you'll be able to get specific resources that are particular to your state. One being the problem gambling helplines. That are a great resource for people that might be worried about their gambling or someone else's gambling. So like I said, every state has their own. Many states that don't run it within their own organization uses the national number, which is 1-800-GAMBLER. And I want to say all, but I'll say most, if not all, helplines are 24/7. They also have calling options, texting options, and chat options. So I know for us here in Connecticut, we operate all three 24/7, and our helpline is specifically run in Connecticut by people who have lived experience, who have experienced gambling harm. So that's always a nice piece too, to be able to talk to someone who had that lived experience so that you can feel like you can relate to them in some way. We also included a screener tool. So if somebody was worried about their gambling or the gambling of someone else, this is more of a clinical tool, but it's also helpful information. So this is just one example of a screening tool. It's called the Problem Gambling Severity Index. It looks at the last 12 months of people's behavior, and there's 9 questions. So knowing that the majority of people that are going to be implementing this are not clinicians or might not have a clinical background, they do go off the diagnostic criteria for gambling disorder. But they're also just questions that are helpful to say, you know, have you ever become restless or irritable when you try to stop or decrease your gambling? Have you ever tried to hide your gambling from your family or friends? Do you notice that you need to gamble with more time or with more money to get the same level of excitement? So again, if someone is answering never, sometimes, most of the time, or all of the time, that's going to give you a better idea of what's going on for this individual. So it's not meant to diagnose the people that you're working with. It's more of if the students want to fill that out and share it, they can, or it can just be used for their own knowledge to assess their level of risk.
So you're actively engaging in the facilitator training now. And we put this in here just to note that it is a part of completing the program to fidelity. So if you were going to go through the facilitator guide and use this as a curriculum, then being a part of a facilitator training like the one you're in today would be a part of that. And as I mentioned, we are recording today. So folks who are viewing this training through a recording, that would satisfy this piece as well to attend facilitator training. We will likely have more live facilitator trainings in the future, but we will also have the recording available to you all who are attending live today. So how to request a copy. So if you go onto the website, which I will put in the chat again, there is a link there to complete a form to request a copy. I'm going to stop sharing so I can show you what that website looks like. Okay, that website looks like this. If you haven't clicked on that link in the chat yet, this is where it will bring you. If you scroll down just a little ways, it says printed copies or electronic copies, PDF format for download. You'll click right here to request some copies. That will bring you to this page where you'll enter your name, your mailing address. Please include the state and the zip code. Your email address for digital copies and physical copies. That helps us reach out to folks later who we know have this. That's very useful for us. Where you work, please let us know how you plan to use the resource. We've honestly had folks respond in so many different ways how they plan to use this. Like Kaitlin mentioned, it's designed for 6th through 12th grade, but we've had folks saying that they're going to use it with adult groups just for conversation because it is a sort of a low barrier tool and resource. We've had folks say that they want to use it in their like 2-gen groups. So you have adults, parents who have difficulty with gambling, and then they have kids and they want to use that in conversations with families. So we've really had folks request to use this for a lot of different things. And that's so helpful for us to know. So that's why we asked the question, how you plan on using the resource. Then letting us know what type of book you want. So do you want this in paperback? Do you want it as PDF? Do you want Spanish? Do you want Portuguese? So letting us know how you'd like to access that. And then there's just a little disclaimer here to let us know how many you'd like. We can accommodate up to 25 paperback copies. And if you need more than 25, like you have a big group that you're working with, or you plan to give the books to the students after you're done with the facilitation, let us know about that too. We may be able to accommodate orders that are larger than 25. It's also possible for us to send you the files. If you have a printing budget and a local printer you want to work with, that's another possibility. So that's why we put that little disclaimer in there that we can accommodate up to 25. We may be able to accommodate more, and we may be able to work with you on how to get more as well. So once you click submit on this, it will bring you to just a little page that says, thank you for ordering, a little bit more details about how long it takes for us to typically send out those copies. But there's also a link right there for you to get the PDF version. So if you haven't yet gone through this and gotten that PDF version, we're about to go into a breakout room where you're going to need to read 2 of the chapters. And then we'll have one breakout room where you get to practice facilitation questions, discussion. And then we'll have another breakout room where you get to practice with the worksheets. So you will need to download a copy of this, or at least have the PDF version up and available to you so you can read that. So I would encourage folks, and I'll put this link in the chat one more time in case anybody missed it. Go ahead and fill out this form now so that you can have access to that in just a minute when we go into our breakout rooms. M says, that was easy. I already received the PDF. I'm so glad to hear that, M. Thank you for saying that. Good to know that it is working. So I will stop the share on this. Well, just quickly, I will go back and say that the facilitator guide, if you didn't see that, if you scroll down here, it says download the facilitator implementation guide here. It's this green button, download the full guide here. If folks need worksheets in grayscale because you're printing and grayscale is cheaper for you to print, we're happy to send you that too. So just let me know in an email that you want the grayscale version, and I'm happy to send that to you. And I'm also just stalling a little bit to give people time to go in here and get the PDF because you're going to need it in just a moment. So the 2 links you really need in here are the request form and the implementation guide here. So I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. All right, so we're going to go into breakouts. What you're going to do in the breakout is take the PDF of the graphic medicine that you hopefully just found on our website, and you're going to spend just a few minutes reading chapter 3. So it begins on page 21 and ends on page 27. It's a short chapter. You'll just take a minute to read that on your own. And then you're going to practice asking one of the facilitation questions in your small group. So each person in the room will pick a question that they want to talk about. The questions are on page 28 of the facilitator guide. So you'll need the PDF of the book and also the PDF of the facilitator guide. That's where you'll see those questions. And like we said earlier, it's okay to just have a conversation about where the conversation goes. You can follow it. So it's okay if you want to come up with your own questions. It's okay if the conversation starts going in some direction. You don't necessarily need to ask a question, answer a question. It can be more organic than that. You'll go around the room and each person have a chance to ask the group a question and facilitate a little conversation. And then we'll come back into this main room and just see how that went for folks. So the reason we're doing this breakout is because sometimes folks get this tool and they're like, hey, this is a really great tool, not really sure how to start implementing it. So this is just to practice a little bit of those skills using this story narrative-based tool to facilitate conversation. We put 20 minutes in here. I'm not sure we're going to need 20 minutes because it's a really short chapter and I don't think it will take folks more than 5 minutes really to read the chapter. But we'll check in with people too as we go along. I'm going to set up the breakout rooms. Are there any questions about what we're doing? Okay, so I'm putting 3 to 4 people in each room. So when you get in there, just take a minute to read the chapter. And then when everyone has had a chance to read the chapter, you can dive into your conversations. Any questions? Is anybody missing the PDF? You don't have a copy of it? Okay, hearing none, I'll open those breakout rooms now. And again. So how did that go for folks? Just for the recording, I'll note that chapter 3 has the context is that you are watching the students in the story playing a video game. So how did that conversation go?
Sarah and Kaitlin, and Kaitlin, thank you for coming into our small group. Because yeah, jumping into a graphic novel is really hard for me and my generational gap here and or deficit. And not having any context about, okay, so fast forward, this is gonna obviously we're on chapter 3, like we did get that we were kind of jumping into the middle. I just kind of said to the group, how about we just focus on protective factors and risk factors? We can just kind of see that some of those things are happening here. So that worked out for us to just kind of focus on that and not worry about what the heck was going on in the community and what was that and all of, yeah. So, I don't know if anybody else wants to talk. I know 2 of our folks couldn't get on, but Marissa was in our group and she's just put something in the chat too, so that's helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for rolling with that and trying to gain understanding of the context. We have only a few minutes left before we're done for the day. So we had intended to do another breakout, but we were just talking and think it might be better for us in terms of context and in terms of everyone being able to participate to just do that in this main room. So if folks are okay with a little change of plan, that is how we're going to approach this last bit in the sake of time and understanding. So, not a breakout, but we're going to do a very similar thing. We just want you to have a chance to take a look at the worksheets and think about what it might be like to not necessarily process in the moment, having a conversation, but to take a minute and write down your thoughts instead. So we're not going to send you into breakout rooms, but if you go back to the PDF of the book and you scroll to page 50, you'll be on chapter 5, something you don't want. And you'll read chapter 5. So the context here is that there has been a chemical spill in the town, which is causing all of these things to happen. It's causing all of the sophomores at the school to turn to zombies. It is causing birds to fall from the sky. Some could be real results of a chemical spill in your town and some not. And the students are taking it upon themselves to do some community organizing and shut this down. So chapter 5 is their big move to shut down the chemical spill at the plant and work together as the student body is working together to fix this in some pretty silly ways. So you'll take just a minute to read chapter 5, and then you'll see in the facilitator guide that there are worksheets that go along with the book. So we're just going to focus on warning signs a little bit. Spoiler alert, through the course of the book, you see that Luke struggles with problem gambling, and he's super lighthearted about it. Doesn't seem like it's a struggle. So his friends don't really mention it too much. And then during chapter 5, you find out that the character Elena also struggles with problem gambling. And you don't really see that so much. The warning signs for her are a lot more subtle, which is true to how warning signs might actually look to somebody you know. So she reflects back on how she came to struggle with problem gambling and what those warning signs really were for her, which is what this little image here is that you can see on the worksheet. So in the interest of time, we'll just give you a couple of minutes to read through the chapter, and then we will talk about the worksheet together. Just another minute or so to finish reading the chapter. And when you're done reading the chapter, if you can just put like a thumbs up in the chat for us, we can see folks are done. Okay, I know it's a longer chapter and we're running short on time. So I'm going to ask folks as they're finishing reading the chapter to think about the worksheet that's associated with this chapter and with others, but thinking about some warning signs. So I'm hopeful that you've made it to the piece of the chapter where Elena reflects on her experience, that she has been struggling with problem gambling as well. I think it's page 67. I'm trying to like look right here and see what page that is. But that's the page we really want folks to see for this piece around warning signs. See, M puts in the chat, she got curious and wanted to have fun. Yeah, and in the greater context too of kind of this environmental disaster in their town, a lot of stress and anxiety, and thinking maybe this would help her. Yeah, M says then felt sad and stupid when she started to lose. Yeah, so thinking about maybe how those feelings would make a person not share with their friends, especially Elena notes that Luke was very open with how he gambled and no one really seemed to see that as a problem. Yeah, I see folks are finishing up. Anxious all the time, trying to make up for the losses, making her think better against them. Yeah, to bet against them would lead to a big payoff. Yeah, exactly. Wendy says she was attempting to use gaming as a coping tool. Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for reading through that. We had an abbreviated timeline for our breakout room. So thank you for doing that quickly. We just wanted to share, and Kaitlin's talked about these, but there are a lot of resources that are available in the facilitator guide. So if the world of problem gambling prevention is new to you, there are resources here. And Kaitlin has shared her email, and you've seen mine as well. And it's in these slides, which we'll send out to folks. You can reach out to us too if you have questions. And I think every state in New England, Kaitlin, correct me if I'm wrong, every state in New England has problem gambling resources, like a person they could contact and reach out to if they had questions about problem gambling specifically.
Yes, and some organizations and some states do have like specific youth problem gambling prevention campaigns. And so we have included some of that information in there too. Just if you want to learn more or have more information, you can check out those specific ones. Like I know that New York is not technically in Connecticut, but there's some great campaigns that come out of New York and some programs. Also, Ohio has some great information about problem gambling prevention for young people on their websites. So as you start to explore the facilitators guide and looking at the resources, like Sarah said, our emails are attached to the slides here. I put it in the chat as well. I'm happy to guide you to additional resources and support you in your efforts.
We have just a minute left, and we'd be happy to answer any questions folks have. I know that this was a short time together to try to kind of take a big bite out of a new type of tool, a new type of resource that folks maybe haven't used something like this before. So it's not easy to get it all in. But if folks have questions, we'd be happy to answer those now. Is there a format of the graphic novel that is print ready to be the half-page booklet? It looks like the PDF won't print well as a booklet. Yes, we have the paperback version of the oh, you're asking, can I send it to you in a way that you could print it yourself?
Yeah, since I'm not in your area to get the paperback version, I wanted to be able to give my print shop to be able to print it as a booklet. It looks like the current PDF won't print. It would print it out of order if we were to make it a booklet.
Yeah, reach out to me, Wendy, and I can help get you a version. I send basically the PDF that you see. That's what I send to our print shop. And they are able to print it as the PDF version. But if you reach out to me separately, we'll make sure that you have a version that is easy for them to print. Any other questions or thoughts or feedback?
There was
Okay.
one feedback that I did see that I think came to me directly, but they said that they're filling out the survey. Hope it helps. It seems like a good tool and look forward to getting some hard copies to try it in the classroom. So that's good news.
Great. Okay, I'm going to stop our recording.